I don't just talk about other people's stuff, I also make my own. Books in particular. To date, I have 4 books you can check out on Amazon. Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, Occult Mafia, Emerald of Maddox City, and the short story collection Assorted Absurdities, Tales of Kaiju Punk and Other Genres. Hop on down to the description for Amazon links to all 4 books. Enjoy whichever ones you read, and enjoy the video.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni Viewer, and welcome to Genre Benders, Obscurities, and Flawed Gems, where we look at the best stuff you've never heard of. Today, a little side-by-side comparison is in order, because it turns out there are remakes in the Universal Monsters lineup that deserve our attention.
Do you mean Stephen Sommers' version of The Mummy, or Joe Johnston's version of The Wolfman?
The answer is yes, Snazzy. Why focus on only one when you can do both at the same time?
Throughout the 90s, there was a resurgence in gothic horror cinema, but for some reason Universal didn't ride that wave. It wasn't until 1999 that they decided on a remake of The Mummy, and it was an instant hit that spawned sequels which got progressively worse, so we'll just be ignoring them. Almost a decade after that, Universal would commission a remake of The Wolfman, but a tumultuous production and a lack of confidence in the hard R rating led to that film being unceremoniously dumped in February and promptly forgotten. As different as they are, though, I feel that these 2 movies are the best remakes that Universal has produced so far of the classic monsters.
Now, I'm sure that to some, calling the remake of The Mummy a proper successor to the original might sound a bit strange.
After all, the original is an atmospheric slow burner dripping with gothic atmosphere, whereas the remake is a pulpy, swashbuckling action-adventure. With such a different tone, how can anyone say the remake stayed true to the original?
Well, my usual method is to measure these movies by their eponymous monsters. They are, after all, the heart and soul of these films.
Those of you who saw my review of the Invisible Man remake will recall that even though I said it's a good horror movie, it ultimately misses the point of the title character, and that's a major strike against it. Does The Mummy fare better in that regard, despite the tonal shift?
To find out, we must first revisit the original film.
In terms of plot, the 1932 version of The Mummy isn't very original. Structurally, it's very nearly a rehash of the 1931 Dracula, which was itself based on a play rather than the original novel. It even features the same excerpt from Swan Lake playing over the opening credits. What sets it apart is the mummy himself, named Imhotep.
Whereas Dracula is a cruel predator stalking his prey, Imhotep can be classified as the ultimate hopeless romantic. He is motivated by love, after all.
In days of old, he loved the Princess Anck-Su-Namun, but when she died young, he went against the natural order by attempting to revive her, and for this he was punished and cursed. Heck, he was given the worst kind of fate an Egyptian could receive, having his name struck from all records and buried without the proper rites, thereby barring him entry to the afterlife. His soul is trapped in his lifeless body for all time as a result. Yet throughout the centuries, he holds on to that love he felt, and once he is revived, his only desire is to be reunited with Anck-Su-Namun.
A longing for love is something that anyone can relate to. However, it is the way in which Imhotep goes about fulfilling his goal that makes him a monster.
He discovers his beloved soul reincarnated in a new body, that of Helen Grosvenor, and he wishes to put it back into the original body so they can finally be together again. He wants her body and soul, which is a nice sentiment. Since he's feeling bitter about his own death, though, he doesn't hesitate to kill anyone who gets in his way, or even just witnesses him skulking around. The final straw that sends him over the edge is that Helen ultimately rejects him. Despite being his love reborn, she is still a new person, and she now has feelings for someone else.
Man, he waits for thousands of years just to learn that his girlfriend has moved on. That's gotta sting.
It's the true tragedy of Imhotep. His love was eternal, but hers was not.
Of course, since he didn't wait that long just to be rejected, he moves forward with the ritual anyway, and is once again killed as a result.
As is typical for the Universal monsters, we do feel a little bit of sympathy for him, but we still understand why he must be disposed of in the end. In the remake, everything about Imhotep is retained and expanded upon.
Whereas the original film has Imhotep condemned for trying to wield power over life and death to save his true love, the remake turns his romance with the princess into a forbidden affair, as she was the exclusive beau of Seti I. Furthermore, their love results in the death of the pharaoh, and that's on top of Imhotep trying to defy the gods afterward. Naturally, Imhotep awakens just as vengeful as ever, but he still loves Anaxunamun, and his vengeance is ultimately enacted just so he can be with her again. All that time, and his mind is still set upon love.
But the remake adds a twist that makes Imhotep even worse than before.
The original film makes it clear that Helen Grosvenor really is Anaxunamun reborn, and Imhotep wants to return her soul to its original body. In the remake, it at first seems like Evelyn Carnahan might be the princess reincarnated, but it turns out she's just another means to an end. Imhotep only needs her as a sacrifice to restore his beloved's life, nothing more. So every time he interacts with her as though she is the princess, he's just using her as a placeholder.
Of course, the remake also ramps up Imhotep's power.
Rather than just indulging in control of other people's minds and bodies, the new Imhotep is a living plague, or set of plagues given the biblical angle. His return is thus reframed as nothing short of apocalyptic, and his menace increases tenfold.
I've sometimes heard people wonder why anyone would curse Imhotep with godlike powers if they're trying to punish him for his crimes.
Oh, that's easy. Cursing him so he'll bring back the 10 plagues is meant to deter anyone else from reviving him, because if they did, he'd bring all sorts of destruction that they wouldn't be able to control. That makes sense?
Oh, I always figured as much. I'm just asking for the benefit of anyone else who may have wondered that.
That's very thoughtful of you.
Now, while it is true that the different tone prevents the Mummy remake from being a horror movie, it is still a monster movie, and one that has a great understanding of its monster. It expands on the character of Imhotep as he already existed, and places him in new circumstances that allow him to flex his supernatural muscles.
Just for the sake of argument, shouldn't tone be a bigger factor? You could say that remaking something subdued and chilling into something fun and exciting is kind of missing the point.
Well, for that, I have two responses.
First of all, the remake doesn't eschew horror entirely. It still has plenty of stuff that's quite harrowing and disturbing. It's just harrowing and disturbing in a different way. Secondly, we can recognize that the remake of The Mummy feels more like an Indiana Jones movie than a Universal monster movie. However, Indiana Jones was inspired by old pulpy adventure stories like those of Doc Savage. What inspired Doc Savage? Tales of exploration and archaeology, lost cities rediscovered, ancient relics unearthed, and the terrible curses attached to them.
Those same stories that inspired the original Doc Savage also inspired the original Mummy.
It's sort of like how beagles and dachshunds are different breeds of dog, but they're both still dogs that share a common ancestor, and you can mix them together to get the most adorable puppy in the whole wide world.
Isn't that right, Dynamite? Are you the most adorable puppy in the whole wide world? Aw, yes you are. Yes, thank you for helping me prove my point, little girl. You're a good puppy. Very good puppy, yes.
Similarly, the Mummy and Indiana Jones share a common ancestor, so mixing them is much easier than you might think, and the result speaks for itself.
So if you've ever wondered why the 1999 Mummy succeeds as a proper remake, there's your answer. Still, there is an expectation that a remake should stay in the same genre as the original. For an example of that, we turn from the remake everyone remembers to the remake Universal wants you to forget, The Wolfman.
This time around, we see a slightly different approach from what we just witnessed. Whereas The Mummy aimed for thrills while expanding on the original character's shtick, The Wolfman retains the horror tone while reinterpreting the original character's shtick.
So once again, we must go back to the beginning first.
The original Wolfman shows a version of Lawrence Talbot who, at first, seems very likable. A family tragedy has brought him back from America to his family estate in England, and despite an absence of many years, he's on good terms with his father and is more than happy to stick around so he can one day take over the estate. Then, while he's toying with the newly upgraded telescope, he just happens to peer into the bedroom window of Gwen Conliffe, and he cannot look away. Larry is so taken by this vision of beauty that he goes to the shop her family owns and begins flirting with her in a way that broadcasts quite loudly that he was peeping on her. He even continues pursuing her after she's made it very clear that she is both not interested and already engaged to someone else. Larry Talbot, however, simply will not take no for an answer.
Now, I'm sure that some modern pseudo-intellectual might look at all of this and loudly proclaim that The Wolfman is a problematic film that promotes toxic masculinity or some such junk. But such an assessment would be missing the subtext. Yes, Larry is acting creepy and aggressive towards Gwen. That's the point.
Even knowing that interactions between men and women have changed over the decades, this behavior would have been considered inappropriate back then just as it is now. He shouldn't have snooped and he should have known when to back off, but instead, he keeps pursuing his prey.
The idea is that Larry is already a proverbial wolf, so contracting lycanthropy is meant to be an ironic curse.
Whereas he could previously mask his predatory side with a certain degree of charm, his curse strips that mask away and exposes him for what he always was. And this realization doesn't sit well with him.
From here, we watch as the curse takes hold and Larry's sanity is called into question.
He seems to be in the process of losing his mind, but the evidence that something supernatural is afoot is hard to ignore. By the end, Larry suffers a fate worthy of a Greek tragedy, as his curse renders him unrecognizable even to his own father, who delivers the killing blow. Until the sequels brought him back, that is.
In the remake, we begin with a simple question. What if Lawrence Talbot isn't losing his sanity because he had already lost it long ago?
Early on, we see signs that Lawrence has what appears to be post-traumatic stress disorder brought about by witnessing his mother's death. However, since PTSD had yet to be identified in Victorian times, he was not properly treated, nor did he ever properly confront his issues. Another tragedy, the death of his brother, brings him back home, the very place he fled long ago, and it seems as though his mind is once again succumbing to madness as long-suppressed memories and a close encounter with a ravenous beast put him over the edge.
By the end, of course, it's obvious that Lawrence's transformative affliction is real. Nevertheless, the psychological aspect is very well played up to that point.
Even though we all know Lawrence's lycanthropy will turn out to be genuine by the end, showing us his deteriorating mental state only enhances the tragedy. It even plays into the transformations.
True, this part of the film clearly takes inspiration from An American Werewolf in London, but it's not shameless copying. There is more at play.
Throughout the whole movie, Talbot is fighting to keep his sanity, and that physically manifests as a struggle against changing into a monster. This contrasts sharply with his father Sir John, who, spoilers, is also a werewolf, but since he embraces his monstrous side rather than reject it, his transformation is smooth and easy.
In short, Lawrence's lycanthropy in this film is still ironically reflecting something unfortunate about him. It's just doing so in a different way. You're also going to talk about the makeup, right? Well, of course I must, as it's a perfect update for this design.
Jack Pierce's original makeup is iconic, of course, and will always be recognizable as what the Wolfman looks like. The remake version is able to retain that concept of a man with lupine features and apply modern techniques to add more detail and make it look more ferocious. No offense to the muscle-bound anthro-canines of Van Helsing, they're fine werewolves in their own right, but this design is just something else. Rick Baker was behind this look, and it's some of his best work.
But there's more to the Wolfman's looks than just a hairy face. Have you ever wondered why the Wolfman looks the way he does? Well, even if you haven't, I'm gonna soliloquize about it anyway.
In both films we see other werewolves, but they're quite different from the central one. In the original film, Bela the Gypsy becomes fully canine when he transforms, whereas Larry remains mostly humanoid.
This partially plays into the ambiguity meant to make us question what we're seeing, but the symbolism goes deeper than that.
The film is called The Wolf Man, after all, and we are meant to see humanity in Larry right up to the end. However, the more humanoid appearance also lends itself to the irony of Larry's condition, since, as mentioned, he already had some unsavory traits as a human which are brought to the surface when he changes.
In the remake, there's a different kind of contrast.
As mentioned, both generations of Talbot are wolves this time around, and they both have similar appearances of being humanoid with lupine attributes. You may notice, however, that when Lawrence transforms, he keeps his clothes on, whereas Sir John disrobes at least partially.
Clothing is usually seen as a mark of civilization, whereas a lack of clothing is seen as a mark of primitiveness or downright deviance. Ergo, the differing states of dress speak to how the two Talbots view lycanthropy.
Lawrence struggles to maintain his humanity, while Sir John embraces the beast and all the freedom it brings. So the former retains his clothes even as they become shredded and filthy, barely maintaining the illusion of humanity, while the latter just loses his garments and the illusion with them. This interpretation is reinforced by the feral child from which Sir John contracts lycanthropy, who is shown in the flashbacks to be nearly nude and fully primitive.
Honestly, there are a lot of different layers you could peel back with the Wolfman, both the original and the remake. I mean, I could go on for hours and hours.
This video is already long enough, though, don't you think?
Yeah, I probably should wrap this up, shouldn't I? Well, the point I'm trying to make is this.
The remakes of both The Wolfman and The Mummy work because they understand the title characters. These movies didn't change the monsters because nothing really needed to be changed. They were already great from the start. There was still room to expand, though, and by expanding on the core elements of the monsters and exploring certain details from different angles, these remakes became worthy additions to the mythos. Of course, it also helps that everything around the monsters is also well done, but if the monsters themselves had fallen short, I believe these remakes would not be so fondly remembered.
I think that if the Universal execs really want to bring their monsters into the modern day, they need to look at these two remakes specifically, as well as the films they were based on, and really understand what makes them work.
That's a tall order, Omni.
I know, Snazzy, but we can still hope. After all, if Imhotep's love can sustain him through the years, then so can ours. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. You know, something else to consider is adapting my book Occult Mafia to the big screen. I'm just saying it's an option.
Congratulations, you reached the end. If you enjoyed this video, you might want to consider supporting us on Patreon. Of course, the other way to support us is to go to Amazon and check out our books, Operation Red Dragon, The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, The Occult Mafia, Emerald of Maddox City, and Assorted Absurdities, Tales of Kaiju Punk and Other Genres. Also check the description for links to DeviantArt and other platforms we operate. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.